of these other states, these northerners who are a little bit slow about natives to get on this bandwagon. So it's my pleasure to speak with you via Zoom tonight. I bet everybody has had a lot of Zoom in the last couple of years, and it's great because now we can really widen our audiences and speak to a lot of people. So thank you for joining me tonight. Now, I am based in Westchester County, New York, but I grew up in Maryland. So as you folks were putting your names and locations into the chat box, I recognized a lot of those towns, including some of my friends from Maryland. So so I do have a very soft spot for the region, but I'm here in New York in Westchester County in a very small landscape. In fact, I live 16 miles north of Midtown Manhattan, Grand Central Station, for example. And if I can plant natives and make a big impact in my landscape on less than 1/5 of an acre, I guarantee you, you can do the same in yours. And if it were still light out, I would tell you that I've got 5 species of asters, native asters, and 5 species of native goldenrods just in my backyard that are in bloom now. And I hope you've got some of those plants too. So let's get to it. I'll just mention that you can visit my website, ecobeneficial.com, for a lot of information on native plants and ecological design. Lots of good info in there, including some interviews with some of your other speakers that you've had in this series. So we're going to be talking about selecting native plants for fall and winter, not only interest, but ecology. And I happened to take this picture a couple of years ago when I was up speaking in Massachusetts of what I like to call aster sickles. So not only are they really important as a nectar and pollen source, but they're really cool when they ice over. I want to share some best practices with you. I think this is really important that we start thinking about selecting native plants that are regionally appropriate. And boy, Virginia is doing that well, but also site appropriate. So my students, I nag them all the time about doing a site analysis, doing a site assessment, and that includes a soil test. So I hope all of you will do that before you start picking plants, because you're going to have a lot more success if you do. And I'd like to suggest that you think about using straight species plants whenever possible. Sometimes you've got to cave and use a cultivar. I get it. And I'll bet that there'll be some questions about cultivars later. I'll be happy to answer them. But I really try to focus on using straight species plants for best ecological function and best genetic diversity. Now, Virginia is awash in incredible resources for you. And if you haven't visited these websites of all these amazing partners, please do. Here is just an illustration of the regional native plant campaigns that are going on in your state. I wish we had this for New York. We don't, but look how amazing it is. This helps you drill down on the plants that are right for where you are. And then I came across these amazing Virginia regional native plant guides that are really, really useful, really, really colorful and free. They're free as a download. You can buy some of these in print as well, but I hope all of you will explore these guides. And then I came across the DCR website of the Virginia Native Plant Finder with these 3 regions defined as mountain, Piedmont, and coastal plain. You can do a search on plants based on a number of criteria on that website. And then, last but not least, the Virginia Physiographic Region Plant Guides, breaking down even more regions into 5. So you have a lot of resources at hand. So suffice it to say that all of the plants that I'm going to be speaking about tonight are not going to be for you. Some will be for you and where you live, in your region, in your landscape, but not all. So before you start going and buying plants, please do some research. And I always like to cross-check references. I think that's a very good practice as well. Oh, this actually is last but not least. I forgot about this one. This is the digital atlas of Virginia flora. Boy, was this terrific to investigate. You can drill down to your county and see what is native. And here's just an example, Heuchera americana I'll be talking about, native to, gosh, just almost everywhere in Virginia. So there are different types of plant features for fall and winter. And I'll bet some of you will recognize this Hearts of Burston bush. We'll see that one later. I have one of these in my own landscape. I absolutely love it this time of year. But the types of features that we can consider, will be late season bloom, obviously. And this is getting kind of strange now because the seasons are much later. The fall season is pretty crazy here in New York now. We're in the 70s this week. And I can remember in the last 10 years, we had snowstorms pretty close to this time in October. So it looks like, we're going to be seeing a lot of things blooming pretty late in the season that didn't used to. I'm noticing that. Other features, we can think about attractive and or persistent spent blooms after the flowers are gone. Colorful foliage, obviously, that's an easy one. Beautiful stem color and showy and or persistent fruits. And I'd like to give a shout out for persistent fruits from native plants, because as birds stopped migrating to some degree, like robins here, we always used to have migrating robins. They would leave in the fall, but now they're overwintering. And we need to think about the wildlife around us that needs some source of food in the winter months, and persistent fruits are one way to accomplish that. We can also think about impressive structure, form. Sometimes trees, for example, are no more beautiful, than in the wintertime. They're just absolutely amazing if you start looking at their form. Interesting trunk and bark. This is the time of year when you start looking at that. Showy seed heads, there are quite a few, and even attractive pods or nuts or seeds. And then, of course, evergreen structure. And again, with climate change and weather extremes that are making these storms that we're having just incredible. Evergreen structure is really important, not just as a visual aesthetic, but also as protection for wildlife. And let's talk about more of these ecological features. And that's really where I'm focused. That nutritious fruit for migrating birds to make sure that they're getting the right food that they need to go on their journey. The persistent fruit or seeds for overwintering birds and other wildlife. How many of those do you have in your garden? Start checking out and start filling in the gaps. The protection from storms and predators too. Where do you have in your landscape that wildlife can protect themselves in the wintertime? And habitat in general for invertebrates and other creatures. The simple act of leaving your perennial standing through winter and not cutting them back over winter provides an enormous amount of habitat to many invertebrates. So let's talk about some of these native plants for fall and winter interest and ecology. Fall bloomers. Well, when we think of fall bloomers, yeah, we do kind of think of asters and goldenrods, and those are meat and potatoes in the fall. For those of you who are new to gardening, Forbes simply flowering perennials. That's all that means. Let's take a look at some. Well, this is one I envy you for having where you are that I don't have. And this will be a late summer, early fall bloomer. Depends how high your elevation is. You might actually get into the meat of the fall season with this plant, depending on where you're located. But it is really a beautiful thing, this Aconitum uncinnatum, monk's hood, and very toxic to herbivores, so highly deer proof, which I'm sure comes in handy for many of you. It's a really fascinating plant that I am not able to grow here, but a lot of you can. One that I can grow here, and I wish it would kind of stop growing so much. See, our Ageratina altissima, white snake root. I kind of giggle when I see this for sale because if you buy this and it reseeds, you will have a lot of it. And that's not a bad thing because it's a really important late blooming plant for pollinators. And it'll take dry conditions and shade, like really miserable conditions, and deer won't touch it, nor will rabbits. But it's a prolific reseeder. And so kind of caution you to curtail it where you don't want it, but appreciate it in areas where you can't grow anything else. And it really is quite beautiful this time of year. I made the mistake of letting it go one year and letting it go crazy and go to seed, and pulled a lot of little seedlings over the season. Some of these plants may be finished blooming where you are, but I'm finding again, some plants are still going strong even here in almost mid-October. Chelone glabra being white turtlehead, a wonderful plant that has evolved with bumblebees who are really effective at jumping into those flowers, almost disappearing and then exiting completely loaded with pollen. It's a wonderful plant. And unlike the other chelone species, this one is a host plant for the Baltimore checker spot butterfly. And I always find that kind of curious that, a particular species can be a host and a related species may not be. And that really humbles me when I think about the evolutionary connections between plants and wildlife and how profound they can be, and how oftentimes we're just not aware of what's going on around us. So if you've got a sunny, moist area, this would be a really great choice, and a very, very pretty plant. And it's a bit on the aggressive side, which is fine. I like to call aggressive natives frisky. Here's another frisky one, a very beautiful one. I'm sure a lot of you have this, Conoclinium colostinum, blue mistflower. And this guy's pretty flexible, I'll tell you. I've seen this grow Mount Cuba Center in quite a bit of shade very successfully. And of course, you can bring it out into more sun. It does like a moister condition, but it is filled with butterflies, absolutely loaded with butterflies. And it is frisky. So just be prepared that it is going to spread. One of my clients, we installed this in part of their garden. And, he said, what do I do when it overreaches its bounds? And I said, well, that's kind of easy. Cut it back. So if you have plants that are a little bit on the frisky side and you don't want them in a particular area, well, you know what to do. Give some away. One that I am surprised to still see in bloom in my own landscape here in October in New York, it's just quite amazing, is Coreopsis tripteris, tall tick seed. Now, again, I've got a small landscape, but I can fully appreciate a 6-foot tall, cool tick seed in my landscape. I've got one. This is a time when you don't need to have a whole bunch of them because there's a lot of biomass there. And just, kind of riffing off of my book about pollinator gardening, we always want to think about creating floral targets for pollinators, having enough of a particular species that the pollinators can find them. And some research out of the University of California, Berkeley Bee Lab, found that a 1 square meter target is ideal for pollinators like bees. So when we get a big old plant like this, it can be 6 feet tall and 6 feet wide. We don't really have to worry about planting more than one. And what a long bloom time this plant has. So for those of us who have smaller landscapes, having these workhorse ecological plants that have a long bloom can be really, really helpful to keep the good stuff going for pollinators. And shockingly, who would believe that threadleaf tick seed is still in bloom? Not a lot in my garden right now. But a couple of my clients, they still have some blooms on theirs, and it's, certainly slowed up. But this is more of an early fall cutoff for this plant, typically speaking. Another one with a very, very long bloom. And this is quite a bit shorter. It is a very good plant that can withstand dry conditions and full sun, and not be very picky about fertile soil. It's a really good workhorse plant. And I love seeing just those last blooms on these plants here in October. And what can I say about this? Dicentra eximia. Well, in truth, this is not native to New York, but I occasionally use it as a nearby native, and I have it in my own landscape. My rule of thumb is with nearby natives is I want to make sure that they are not frisky and do not cause a problem to the local ecosystem. But this is such a workhorse with bloom from April through now. Here it is in October. It's my bleeding hearts are in full bloom. Amazing plant for bumblebees. They really seem to prefer to be in a kind of a part sun, part shade condition with good moisture, good fertility, and you'll be happy that you've planted one if you've got the right conditions, because they just make you smile throughout the virtually the whole growing season. They slowed down a little bit in the heat of the summer, but here they are again, just blooming away, and lots of bumblebees on this. Dolingeria umbellata, flat top aster. As you probably know, common names aren't all that helpful because they are often misnomers. This is related to asters. It's similar, but it's not an aster. It is a fantastic plant. These plants are quite tall. You can easily expect a 5-foot stretch on these, and very floriferous, easy for me to say, and don't have much going on in the lower branches. I had a client this year that got a volunteer in a container of, I think it was Monarda didyma, scarlet bee balm. Didn't know the plant was in there. And she said, "What is this?" And I said, "That's flat top aster. What a great addition to your garden." So sometimes these volunteer plants, whether they're coming from a nursery or somebody else's garden, can be quite welcome. It's a beautiful plant, very open, accessible to many different pollinator species. And I'm thoroughly in love with eupatoriums. Now, argyropyweeds used to be in this genus, but no longer. They're now eutrochium, and they're also great plants. But eupatorium, they're just wonderful plants for pollinators. This I have started to be able to find for sale. Used to be, just relegated to the occasional restoration nursery around me, but now it actually is being sold in garden centers and native plant nurseries alike. Really tough plant. In fact, my neighbor has one growing in about a 4x4 inch square of dirt between two driveways. I love that. And he's got this 4-foot tall plant that's just emerged out of virtually no soil. Full bloom. In full bloom, they are loaded with pollinators and remind me a lot of kind of a, mountain mint in some way, I think, in terms of the number of different kinds of pollinators that they attract and the frenzy with which they're feeding on these plants. These are really, really great plants, and there are many different eupatoriums. I obviously can't share everything with you, but I'll share this one with you too. So this is Eupatorium perfoliatum. This is bone set. Really likes a different condition. This is more of a wetland plant. It's also quite tall, statuesque. I just am in disbelief that some plugs that I planted for clients last May and June reached 6 feet tall this year. Pretty extraordinary. You don't really expect bones to be that tall, but wow. Usually not that tall. Like the Hyssopifolium, they're also very deer resistant and very, very, very compelling to pollinators. And these guys are kind of at their, they've been at the end of their bloom. They're just a few flowers left on them, but early fall, they're still doing their thing. Euthymia graminifolia, flat top goldenrod. This used to be categorized as a solidago. And of course, the scientists wouldn't have any fun if they didn't change scientific names every now and again. So it's now Euthymia, has a lot of the same powerful eco juice for pollinators, very, very attractive to many pollinators, and a good one if you've got full sun and a moist, even a wettish condition. There are not a lot of plants that'll be happy there, but this is really spectacular. And I find this pairs very, very well with great blue lobelia syphilitica, that lovely purple of great blue lobelia, the purpley blue, and the yellow of euthymia are just unbeatable. And for something completely different, an underloved, underappreciated native plant, Eurybia divaricata. And asters were all renamed too, because gosh, we couldn't leave them aster as aster, that'd be too easy. I was chastised last year when I did a planting of these in a dry shade area for a client. The landscape contractor was doing an installation for me, said, "Oh, you're using those?" I said, "Yes, I'm using those. Nothing else wants to live in that condition. These are fantastic plants that can take dry shade. I've never seen them deer browse. Let's hope that continues. And pollinators love them, even though, bees would rather be out and about in the sunshine. They will go in a shady area to feast on whitewood aster. Quite variable in size when they're really not getting much in the way of resources in terms of moisture and organic matter. They'll stay a bit shorter, but I've got some that are easily 3 to almost 4 feet tall in areas where they are being a little happier and have a little less competition as well. Great plant. And a closely related plant is Eurybia macrophylla, big leaf aster. And I typically use these interchangeably. It's nice to have alternatives when you're doing native gardening, because sometimes you can't get the plant that you want. Have you ever had that feeling? Boy, I have. I do think that it's much easier now to find native plants than it has been over the last couple decades, but it still isn't easy. I have to travel quite a bit to find plant material. So for example, if you're ordering plant plugs, and I love using native plant plugs for clients, such an economical way to plant. And if you get viable plugs that are well grown, most species will do very, very well in the first growing season if planted in spring. And within 2 years, a lot of plug material will be full on mature size. Depends on the species, though, I will say that. So when I can't find whitewood aster, which seems to be very popular now, probably because it's deer resistant, I'm often looking at Eurobia macrophylla as an alternative. Gosh, all these make me smile. Gentiana clausa, bottle gentian. Go figure that there is a plant out there that's in bloom in October, and this is the bloom. It never really opens. It takes a big old strong bumblebee to force its way into that flower to get the good stuff. Who can't love that? A part sun, part shade condition with decent moisture, decent organic matter is where this plant's gonna like to live. Very hard to find around here. I hope you have more success if this is a plant that's suitable for your landscape. One that I can find, and I do use up here in New York, is Heuchera villosa, hairy alum root, the big beefy alum root curl bells we think of Heuchera also as, but this is a very different one from the spring bloomer. So this is in bloom even now. I still have bees nectaring on my Heuchera villosa in my own landscape in October. Pretty amazing. And they've got those kind of hairy, thick leaves that are just juicy and a much bigger form than, say, Heuchera americana, but a really robust plant, very easy to grow, a part sun, part shade condition with decent moisture is going to be where it's happy. Can't take it too dry, doesn't want it too wet. You know, Heucheras don't like it wet. They kind of rot out on their crowns if they're too wet. But this is a wonderful one for the shade, part shade garden. And I love using these. Helenium autumnale sneezeweed. Doesn't it stink that we have so many common names of native plants that end in weed? We need to rename these because these are not weeds. These are such high value plants for sunny and moist to even slightly wet conditions with that wonderful clown nose cone. Think about all the good stuff in there, the nectar and pollen in there. And then after flowering, we've got a really good seed source. So always be thinking about what plants are doing after they finish feeding the pollinators. And a lot of these are feeding birds and other wildlife. A plant that we don't see much of here, but you have it natively in Virginia, is the purple-headed sneezeweed with the really interesting colored cone. And this likes very similar conditions. It's almost woody looking in terms of its branching, isn't it? It's I think it's a wonderful architectural statement and a great pollinator plant to boot. And our helianthus. So no, we are out of the world of Helianthus annuus that is not native to where we are, either of us here in New York, or you guys in Virginia or close by states. We have so many Helianthus species that are native, and they are small flowered, and they're all really excellent for pollinators. The open flowers accommodate the tiniest little, say, flower flies or beetles or different types of bees, both small and large. And it's good to have a variety of different flower shapes, sizes, and colors, because pollinators are very different in terms of what they're looking for. We have these suites of floral traits called pollination syndromes that really determine what a particular type of pollinator will be likely to use. So you've probably all seen, you know, the hummingbirds going after red tubular flowers. That's an excellent match for them on an evolutionary basis. And it's thought that perhaps those hummingbirds have evolved to use red and tubular flowers because bees don't see red very well against green foliage. They see on a different spectrum than we do. So this type of color is appealing. This yellow color is appealing to many different types of pollinators, including bees. But if you're a small bee and you have a short tongue, you're really happy to find this kind of very open arrangement of flower. Still blooming in my garden. Who can believe this? Very, very long bloom time. I'm an enormous fan of Pycnanthum species, our mountain mitts. many different species for many different regions and landscapes. This is quite a workhorse. This particular one I love because it has a very, very long bloom. Easy to grow. Yes, it's a little frisky, but I don't find it obnoxiously so. And, you know, if you want to cover some ground, you won't have any weeds, that's for sure. But attracts a lot of wasps. And I hope you will all show your appreciation for our native wasps, both the ones that are predators and the ones that are parasitizers. They're really important in our ecosystems. And when I see wasps feeding on some of these plants, I'm really happy that I've got something to provide to them. I also see bees on these too, including honeybees, non-native honeybees. And there are lots of goldenrods. And of course, this is one. I have this one in my own landscape. I use it whenever I can in woodland landscapes, in shade gardens. Solidago cassia, this is a variety cassia, blue stem goldenrod. I'm seeing more of these this year spontaneously occurring. There must be seed banks that are you know, now that people are leaving leaves alone a little bit, that are, you know, starting to appear, which is really, really encouraging. I plant these for clients with an understanding that if we're in heavy deer browsed countryside, that these are not highly deer resistant. We can always hope for the best, but unlike some of the sun-loving goldenrods, they're not quite as deer resistant, but they are very effective. They're rather slow to grow, and they're rather slow to mature and form groupings. So give them time, but they'll reward you with this lovely bloom in the shade. And one that also has some shade tolerance, although I prefer to use this one in a part sun to part shade condition. Too much shade, it tends to flop, but this is Solidago flexicalis, zigzag goldenrod, really a nice one. And when it's happy, it is happy. It spreads and it does reseed, and you know, you get a little bit too much of it, then just edit. But it's a wonderful goldenrod. Many different, I love them all. I have all of these. Solidago odora, sweet goldenrod. So named for that lovely scent that the plant has, not because it tastes sweet. And this is a plant that is pretty flexible. I like to use it in full sun, but it'll take part sun perfectly fine. I'm afraid to put it in part shade, but I do see it growing there sometimes without flopping. Sometimes too much shade, you know, you'll see some flop on this, but it's quite a flexible plant in terms of the amount of sun and the amount of moisture, an absolute boon to pollinators. Variable in height, expect about 3 to 4 feet, and just a really good one that deer don't like. Yay. Solidago rugosa, wrinkle leaf goldenrod. This is kind of an interesting one that has a very different shape to it. It's nice to have an array of goldenrods in your landscape because not everything blooms at the same time or has the same duration of bloom. This one is often used in moist to wet soils, but it also takes soil on the drier side as well. It seems to be pretty flexible, but there are lots of cultivars of some of these goldenrods, and I just invite you to try the straight species if you can find them. There's another one that I have and I love, Solidago speciosa. Even in my tiny little landscape, I've got little niches, pockets of areas that are moisture, you know, more shade here, sun there, moisture here, dry there. So I'm able to have a lot of different species. And this is showy. It has a panicle of flowers that's very different from a lot of the other goldenrods. And this one wants it definitely sunny. That's where it prefers to be. And with soil on the drier side. Average soil would be okay, but certainly not too moist or too fertile. And it's a spectacular plant, good 5 feet tall in my experience. There's variability in genetics, as you know. Another one in full bloom now that is so charming, Symphyotrichum cordifolium. Too easy to call it an aster, so we had to change that too. This is bluewood aster. And, you know, you think, well, we saw the whitewood aster. Well, that one I reserve for full shade. This one I like to have at the edge of the woods or the edge of a shady area. Boy, when this gets going, this will also be a very prolific reseeder. I have a lot of this. I think I'm going to have to edit a little bit because it's going bonkers in my backyard. But at this time of year, it's glorious, just with that very light pale blue that is so pretty and you know, incredibly attractive around the woodland goldenrods in back of it in my landscape. What can I say? I don't think I've ever seen an aster I didn't like, including this one, Symphyotrichum ericoides, heath aster. You see here that it looks like it's growing in like gravel, and boy, it's a tough plant. Hot and dry, not a lot of fertility, not for this one. I like to use it roadside. I find that this does have a bit of deer resistance. I'm not betting the farm on it, right? But certainly more so than some of the other asters. Covered with flowers at this time of year. And I will admit to having a weakness for a cultivar called snow flurry that's only inches tall, and I use it a lot over rock walls. It's a beautiful aster. Symphyotrichum levi, smooth blue aster, and also have this one. This is a tall one, you know, 4 feet, 5 feet. Yep, easy peasy. It's a prolific reseeder. It is everywhere in my garden. And I just, what do I do with volunteers? I just dig them up, put them in a pot, give them away. You know, that's what I do. But loaded pollinators. And then, and by the way, I should have mentioned that this one is going to like a drier condition in full sun, whereas our New England aster and the New York aster that's following, these prefer to have some moisture, full sun and moist soil. And these also can be quite variable, 3, 4, 5, even 6 feet tall. They tend to be a little bushy, a little leggy on the bottom to make them a little bit bushier, should have said. You can do what's called the Chelsea chop in June and cut them back to try to make them a little bit bushier and less leggy. Beloved by so many pollinators. This is Symphyotrichum novae belgii, New York aster, a little bit smaller, a little bit different in stature and in color, but very, very similar, and I think equally effective. I don't care for all the dwarf cultivars of these plants. I just don't think they attract as many pollinators as a straight species, so I try to use these guys. Another one I'm head over heels in love with is Symphyotrichum oblongifolium aromatic aster. And here is a case where, yeah, actually there are some good cultivars like October Skies. I think this actually is October Skies, just loaded with pollinators. Hot and dry, rocky, lots of reflected heat, not a problem for it. It's quite bushy, it almost looks woody, and a beautiful plant. And then I do show some love for plants that perhaps are not as lovable, like frost aster, which is a bit of a rhizomatous, a bit of a weedy plant, but it has such a late bloom that I leave it in my garden and edit some of it so it doesn't take over, but I keep some of it. And that's what I suggest to my clients too, keep some of it, because this plant will offer, last year was in bloom in November. I mean, it was pretty amazing. And it's tall, you know, 4 feet, 5 feet. It's not a small thing. And kind of, this is an oddball plant that I have a passion for too. This is actually a native annual, Trachostema dichotomum, forked blue curls. This is an annual. And I bought one of these at a plant sale years and years ago. I didn't even realize at the time it was an annual, and now it kind of recedes wherever it wants to go in my landscape. And it cracks me up. At this time of year, you see really kind of large bees that are not size appropriate for these flowers, trying to hang on for dear life to get the good stuff. It's quite something, but a very pretty ethereal looking plant with a very late bloom. Now we can take a look at some fall bloomers of shrubs and vines. Common witch hazel, Hamamelis virginiana. Gotta love witch hazels. They're such wonderful plants, but they get quite big. And like this picture shows, they'll grow in full sun, but in nature, where I see them is in full-on shade to part shade. And that is where I reserve them for planting, because that's typically where you're going to find them. Clematis virginiana, Virgin's Bower. This is past bloom now for me, but in the very early bit of fall, it was still in bloom, might be in bloom for some of you still. And the antidote to the invasive one that we see so much around here, but a beautiful vine that it's very easy to grow, and it kind of likes, a part shade condition. That's kind of where it wants to be. I see it in nature often in even more shade than that. And gosh, I'm gushing again. Lonicera sempervirens, Carl honeysuckle. Another one of my go-to plants when I need a vine in a sunny condition, because it has such a long bloom. And like many of these plants, it does so many things well. It is a larval host plant. It is a wonderful nectar plant for long-tongued bees and hummingbirds. And then it develops fruit for migrating birds. Think about those multiple duty native plants when you have small spaces and need a lot of function from these players. And then we're going to just run through some fall foliage color for trees. This is probably the most familiar part of this talk for you, but obviously red maple, who doesn't want to see that? That's absolutely glorious. But think about in the other parts of the season what these plants are doing. Like around here where I live, this is the first blooming native plant other than spring ephemerals that bees will be utilizing when it's in bloom in March. Tough bees like bumblebees, and honeybees as well. Sugar maple, sadly, this plant keeps getting its range threatened due to climate change. I hope we won't lose them because they're so glorious. But look at some of the other plants that maybe you're not noticing beyond the big trees, like our serviceberries or amelanchiers. The cheery, lovely April blooms followed by fruit in June that's edible to us and wildlife. And then we get this great fall color. Think about all the wonderful things these plants do. Here's Amelanchier canadensis shadblow with a little bit different coloration. Sometimes they look great. Sometimes they look okay. It kind of depends on how much moisture we're getting or not in the fall season. And even pawpaw. Would you think of pawpaw, Asimina triloba, as a great one for fall color? Well, if you have one in your yard and you're looking at it now, maybe you are. I love these plants. They look like tropical wonders that are native and produce the largest fruit in North America, which is fully edible to us. Now, one of the secrets to native plantings is to make sure that you are using plant partners or pollination partners where needed. In the case of pawpaws, you do need two genetically different plants in close proximity for cross-pollination. Carpinus carolinea, musclewood. I love this tree too. Yeah, check out the leaves. It's not just about the cool bark, which is pretty fabulous, but the leaves themselves are absolutely glorious. And one that is an understory tree in most cases, and will grow with with quite a bit of shade as long as there's sufficient moisture. Our carrier species, I think, are underplanted. Go plant some hickories. We need them. We can't lose them. They're too important, ecologically speaking. Shagbark is a fantastic tree. We'll see this again, but beautiful foliage. And even hackberry, which we think of for other reasons, it has this beautiful coloration in fall. Even redbud. Who thinks of redbud as being showy in the fall? Well, I do. It's not just about early spring. Boy, the bumblebee's happy when this is in flower in the spring, but the leaves are glorious too. Chiananthus virginicus, fringe tree. I hesitate to even mention this because it is being troubled now in some states by the emerald ash borer, which is not a good thing, but they are fantastic trees in bloom. These are dioecious species. This is when we need to think about pollination partners. We need, these are typically male plants and female plants. We need both so we get the fruit on the females. Sometimes they have some confusion and they have both male and female flowers on them, but by and large they're dioecious, so you should plant them that way. Pagoda, dogwood, Cornus alternifolia, another one of my favorites, an understory tree that's layered like a beautiful pagoda. Glorious plant for pollinators, for birds with its fruit and gorgeous red color. Even flowering dogwood. We often just focus on the spring action of these, but look at the fall beauty of that plant. And hawthorn. Where I am, we're mostly using Crataegus viridis, but this is one that's more common where you are, cockspur hawthorn. All the hawthorns are quite extraordinary ecological plants, great for pollinators, fruit for birds. They have thorns, they have pretty serious thorns unless you get a thornless form, but that's great protection for birds. Black walnut having absolutely magnificent fall foliage, besides all the other great things it does as a larval host, as a wildlife food source. Tulip tree, Liriodendron tulipifera, a glorious tree at this time of year. Another host plant, another plant with the crazy tulip-like flowers that appeal to some bees and hummingbirds. Liquidambar, Staurocyphlua, sweet gum. Well, yes, do they create those little seed balls? Absolutely they do, and that's perfectly fine because wildlife needs those seed balls. I'm working on a project for college with a landscape architect, and they wanted to use a sterile form of this. And I said, what's the point? It's no longer native if it's not producing ecological juice. Black tupelo, Nyssa sylvatica. If you know any beekeepers, you know that they love this for its honey. So it's a great pollinator plant, but so many other things going on with this, including the fall color. And Oxydendron arboreum, another one that is a magnet for bees. This makes great honey. When I go to the Southeast, to Tennessee and, in Western North Carolina, I see sourwood honey as being the most expensive honey available, but look at the color on this thing. And then, of course, we've got white oak. Can't say enough good things about oaks. I'm sure you've all purchased Doug Tallamy's new book on oaks. If you haven't, please do. Such important plants, hosting so many butterfly and moth caterpillars, red oaks as well. And if you can't get a big old oak in your landscape, look at some of the shrubby oaks like Quercus prenoides, dwarf chinkapin oak. Sassafras, that's a happy plant. Those leaves that look like mittens make me smile. These are also dioecious plants and rarely sold that way. They have a clonal habit and they spread unless you stay on top of the suckers, but why would you? Let them do what they need to do in nature. But let's get our native nurseries to start selling the males and females when we have dioecious plants. And pollinator partners for ones that need other pollination services, and I'll talk about later. Tilia americana, American basswood, another perfectly extraordinary tree. All of our Tilia species, whether native or non-native, are excellent for pollinators, but this is the one that I like to use. And if we are dabbling in the American elm that was just so devastated, you might want to think about getting a disease-resistant one to keep it going. But look, you can see why there were so many elms planted, as they're so beautiful with that vase shape. And then we'll take a look at some beautiful fall foliage color on shrubs. So even the simple red chokeberry, you need a smaller shrub in the landscape that doesn't get too big. It's good for pollinators with its flowers in spring, and then it has fruit for birds. It often persists into winter. And then that great fall color, great plant. Will grow in wet areas and average garden soil, and after it establishes, even a little bit on the dry side. As will this Aronia melanocarpa, black chokeberry. This is the one that we think of as having the superfruit, the black fruits that are known as superfruit in Eastern Europe, and sold as tonics and concoctions that we didn't even know this. So think about some of these native edible plants. Make sure that you have identified your species before you ever forage, please, though. Another edible one, Corylus americana. I love American hazelnut. Now, this guy does need a pollinator partner. These are wind pollinated, but they are not always self-fruitful. They may be producing a little bit in the way of nuts, but if you get genetically different plant in their vicinity, you're going to have a lot more success. And these are tough. A part sun condition and dry soil to average moisture, they're going to be happy as clams and be very productive. And, you know, in the early season, when some of our native bees are just trying to wake up and honeybees are waking up when it's 50 degrees or more, they're looking for pollen sources. And some of these wind pollinated plants that have low quality pollen, but a lot of it can be very helpful to them, like this American hazelnut. Diravilla lanicera, not really a honeysuckle. It's rather confusing, this name, but boy, these are spectacular plants with yellow flowers in the growing season, and they're not very big, 2 to 3 feet tall and wider than tall, and another one with beautiful color in the fall. And that common witch hazel, again, still looking pretty spectacular. And then sweet spire, I was talking about this earlier today, Itea virginica, another one that really does do extremely well in moist to wet conditions, because that's where it wants to live. So best to use it in that situation, and pretty trouble-free plant. It's clonal, it's going to spread, it suckers, so make sure you give it room, and you're going to get this beautiful color show when you do. Our native spice bush, an underutilized plant around here, highly deer resistant. It'll grow in a closet, as an old instructor used to tell me. Another one, it's a host plant. It's early nectar and pollen source. It has fruit for migrating birds. So many things that these plants do. Our sumacs, I'm going to run through these pretty quickly. Aromatic sumac. Early bloomer, very different bloom than some of the other sumacs. And you probably have seen this cultivar called Grow Low. And these guys are kind of nifty because they're woody ground covers and very effective at doing that. Tough, dry conditions, heat, fine. And the straight species is dioecious. This is said to have both male and female flowers on it. So what I do if I'm using this plant, I always get another couple of the Rhus aromatica straight species in for cross-pollination and hope for the best. All of our sumacs are magnificent in the fall with these amazing leaves. Go to the High Line in New York if you ever get a chance to come to New York City and see these sumacs. They are incredible, very statuesque. Yes, you got to kind of pick and choose which sumacs, because a lot of these spread quite vigorously, but sometimes that's what you need in a landscape. Staghorn sumac, another magnificent specimen. Then we get to some other plants that maybe you just don't even notice until they do something like this. Vaccinium angustifolium, low bush blueberry. This is not as prevalent where you are as where I am, nor is this, but Vaccinium carombosum are edible blueberries that really require acidic soil. Another good reason to get that soil test done, and are productive. If we have pollination partners around them, they need genetically different plants around them to be very self-fruitful and produce a lot. This one is more common where you are, Vaccinium pallidum, hillside blueberry. They're all good, and they all serve a good purpose, both for wildlife and for humans. Viburnum cerefolium. This is one I've started to see for sale more, thank goodness. It's maple leaf viburnum. It likes that acidic soil, really acidic, like the blueberries do, and can grow in full-on shade to part shade, much shorter than some of our native viburnums. And, see a fully grown one of these is like maybe 4 feet tall, maybe a little bit bigger, depends. It takes a long time to get there. But we also have Viburnum dentatum, arrowwood viburnum. So with all of our native viburnums, one of the hidden secrets is that they're not self-fertile particularly. So you do need genetically different plants planted in close proximity to each other for best fruiting. And what do I mean by close proximity? Well, I'm comfortable with 50 feet or less. That's kind of my go-to number. Closer the better if we're trying to have pollination occur. So Viburnum dentatum is a little bit more, even more difficult than some of the other species of viburnum, because not all viburnum dentatum, for example, cultivars bloom at the same time. So be very careful. And I've got some information on this on my website if you're interested. Another glorious viburnum, Viburnum nudum, possum hall viburnum. So depending on the source, you may see this as Viburnum nudum, variety nudum, versus Viburnum nudum variety casinoides. So make sure if you're buying genetically different plants that you're planting the same species or variety, depending on the resource that you're using in terms of identifying the plant. Because if you put a nudum together with a casinoides, it doesn't work. They don't flower at the same time. Viburnum prunifolium, a tough native viburnum. This is the one that I reserve for hot and dry areas with less fertility. A great plant for wildlife. All these have great fruit. And we'll take a look at a couple vines that have some good fall color. Campsis radicans, fantastic plant if you've got the space and a really good, strong a support for it. It's a scrambler. It kind of runs more than creeps, so be careful where you put it. But a really good one from hummingbirds. American bittersweet. It is a bittersweet note that I mentioned this plant is we have our own native bittersweet. It's not the one that we see in all of our landscapes, and I fear that reintroducing the native one, they may hybridize. I don't know that for a fact, but it's a concern that we have. So think about these things. But if you've got real bittersweet, get it out. But here it is. This is the real deal, the native one that should be here. Parthenocissus cankifolia, Virginia creeper. What a workhorse of a plant. Another one, larval host, fruit for birds, really nutritious fruit for migrating birds, beautiful fall color, great on a fence, great on a structure, great as a ground cover. Terrific plant, underutilized. And then we'll take a quick look at some beautiful fall color on graminoids, grasses, sedges, rushes, those kinds of things, color, structure, and seeds. Big blue stem, also known as turkey foot. It's a big one. It's a big one. You can get up to 8 feet or so tall on this one. Make sure you got some room for it. Great seed source. And even some of our sedges have wonderful color. Like this little Appalachian sedge, which is one that I see being used more and more along with our other sedges. I see many of these for sale at native nurseries now. Chasmanthium latifolium, northern sea oats. This will take quite a bit of shade, guys. It is a prolific reseeder. This is a cool season grass, unlike some of our other grasses. It is a prolific reseeder. Say you have Japanese stiltgrass or a really bad invasive that you're trying to displace. This is an excellent plant to do that with. I often use it in that way. Purple glovegrass, it never looks as good except when it's in fall color, but effective. Tough grass for roadside, very short, doesn't get very big, and has beautiful, beautiful fall foliage, as does pink muhly grass. I took this picture of pink muhly up in Massachusetts, which I thought, I didn't even think it would grow up there, but here it is, and absolutely spectacular in bloom. Switchgrass, can't go wrong with switchgrass. Just incredible rain garden plant. Doesn't like it real dry, but average moisture to even inundated on occasion. It will be fine as a rain garden plant, and full sun is where it's going to do best. You don't want it flopping. As with this little blue stem, is absolutely has to have full sun not to flop, and it doesn't like a lot of organic matter, and it doesn't like a lot of moisture, but it is an extraordinary little grass and a clumper. And I'll just mention some of our clumping native grasses are great nesting sites for some of our bumblebees. Scirpus woolgrass, I see these in very wet areas, statuesque. A cyperinus rather, not really grass, but related, and with these showy seed heads. After you see these, you absolutely want them if you've got a wet area in full sun. Sargassum nutans, Indian grass, great in a meadow, very aggressive grass. Mount Cuba Center, love that place in Delaware. They've got a beautiful meadow with this in it. I would say reserve this for large areas. Then we'll take a look at a couple of plants that have some interesting fall foliage that are perennials. Here we go. This is Amsonia, Tabernet montana, variety Tabernet montana, Eastern Blue Star. I know everybody points to the Hubrechtii, which is not native to Virginia. So let's use our native one. And this, by the way, is a cultivar short stack of this plant. So if you don't have a lot of room, you can try this. These are really nice plants that like a kind of a part sun condition, some decent moisture. They've got a beautiful blue flower in spring. Gillenia trifoliata, Bowman's root. You know, couldn't believe that this had such great color until boom, there I saw it. This is another one I use kind of in a part sun, part shade condition. It'll even take full shade and still flower. Lovely one. Heuchera americana, there are some plants that just look good with their foliage year round. Certainly this Heuchera does. This is another one that I use in dry shade conditions, especially where there's a lot of deer pressure, spring bloomer. And even some of our wonderful ferns are quite showy in fall, like this royal fern, wetland lover, and the cinnamon fern, another wetland lover. And yeah, sometimes you can get a good color show on a penstemon, on a beard tongue. For stem color, not too many, but where you are, Cornus amomum, silky dogwood would be a plant of choice if you're in a wetland area. With we have red twig dogwood mostly up here. We have some amomum as well, but that is not native to where you are. And showy and or persistent fruit on trees. Well, this one might look familiar. We'll see that in a second. Hackberry. There's that fruit still hanging on, waiting for birds to gobble it up. The crataegus, the hawthorn, very good nutritious fruit, but it, you know, maybe it's not the favorite at a particular time. You're going to see some of it hanging on through winter. That's actually good. And then common persimmon, that was the first picture that I showed you. Common persimmon is a really fun one to grow. They are dioecious, they're males and females, and you will get the fruit on the females. Perfectly edible, not the Costco size persimmon, much. I'll just kidding. And Juniperus virginiana, Eastern red cedar, is one that I like to use a lot in landscapes, especially roadside. High value for a source of fruit for birds. I often see those robins that forgot to migrate and are here over the winter, scrambling to eat these fruits when there's a bad snowstorm. These are also dioecious plants, males and females. Even Magnolia virginiana, sweet bay magnolia, has extraordinary fruit. There are lots of cool magnolias native to the Southeast. This is one that we share in common. And sassafras, another workhorse plant, another dioecious plant. Never sold that way, but this one we saw earlier that forms these lovely colonies, and just a wonderful all-round wildlife plant. For showing and persistent fruit on shrubs, well, there's that chokeberry again that will often persist, as well as the black chokeberry. Don't eat the red one, and don't eat the black one right off the plant. Make sure you're doing something with it first, like processing it with a little sugar. You may never, get the feeling of your mouth again. They're a bit tannic if you eat them raw. Calicarpa americana, American beauty berry. I love this plant. So do bluebirds and many other birds. And those fruits will often persist when all the leaves are gone. And there's that heart suburstan, Euonymus americanus. We do have a native Euonymus. And it is spectacular in the fall when its seed capsules burst. The rest of the season, you really don't notice it. Good woodland plant. Gaultheria procumbens, wintergreen. Short evergreen plant that has these tasty fruits. If you're on a hike and you have bad breath, pop one off and you'll feel a lot better. American holly with that persistent fruit. We'll see that again. And winterberry with that persistent fruit. All of our hollies, our native hollies, are dioecious, male and female plants. Plant them that way, please. There's the fruit of Lindera benzoin, spice bush. Edible, guys, can be used fresh or dried, and great for birdies. You guys have several bayberry species in Virginia. This is one that we share in common, Morella pennsylvanica, northern bayberry. This is a wind pollinated plant, but again, another dioecious plant. So you will only get the fruit on the females. And it's semi-evergreen where I am, probably fully evergreen or close to it where you are, depending on your altitude, but very effective in deer country because deer don't touch it. And even the Opuntia humifera, the eastern prickly pear cactus. This is such a cool plant that I love to use if I've got this kind of condition, you know, kind of a rock garden setting where there's great drainage and, you know, a lot of sun and reflected heat. And in the winter, they kind of collapse. They look like they're deflating. There's the Rus aromatica, fragrant sumac fruit, really groovy looking, and that often persists into winter. And all of these sumac fruits that you probably recognize are quite pretty and effective for birds. And our native roses, here's Rosa Carolina rose with the rose hips that are left at the end of the season that might come in handy as a food source in the middle of winter when there's nothing else for a fruit-eating bird to eat. Viburnum dentatum. Truth be told, these don't make it very long into fall, these fruits in the gardens that I design, because there's so little for birds to eat, migrating birds, that they gobble these up. But maybe you'll have a few left in your landscape if you have more resources around you. Viburnum lentago, nannyberry. Those are also very showy. Viburnum nudum, that possum haw. I mean, that's just glorious, isn't it? That coloration with the foliage and the fruit. We're getting there, guys. And then some showy and persistent fruit on vines. Well, that bittersweet I just show you with caution, because I don't want this hybridizing with the non-native invasive. The Carl honeysuckle, excellent source of nutrition for migrating birds, as is the fruit from Virginia creeper. And so we'll run through some beautiful structure and form on trees. There's American beech, a clonal plant. You think you're looking at a grove, and it's typically one tree, magnificent in the winter, as is American sycamore, more of a wetland plant, best used near some moisture. White oak, glorious. Really check these out, you know, when all the leaves are gone, because they're just as beautiful. Red oak, nothing beats an oak. And there's some really interesting trunk or bark on trees. And I invite you to check this book out. It's an excellent book. And this gentleman does speak quite a bit online. Here's striped maple as a young tree. And really, it doesn't stay this way, but it's pretty darn showy. And there is a variation of this plant that colors up red in the winter. Very hard to find for sale, but I thought it was so cool I had to share it with you. River birch, yes, we all know them and love them. Please use them near, you know, a river or some moisture. I hate seeing how these are planted in really dry, unpleasant conditions. Yellow birch for higher altitudes where it's not so humid, magnificent bark. Caryoveda, that shagbark hickory. Ever think about what might go up underneath exfoliating bark? Well, think about it as habitat for perhaps a bat or a butterfly. You're doing them a favor in addition to producing the nuts on these plants. Musclewood, so named for that sinewy, beautiful bark. Check out the bark. Even hackberry, as it matures, gets so interesting. Flowering dogwood has some of the most beautiful bark that we don't notice. And it reminds me a bit of the bark of common persimmon, which is also quite extraordinary. And American beech, looking on a very old one like an old aging wrinkled elephant. Magnificent. Black walnut, I mean, so much to love about this. The American sycamore doing its camo number. Pin cherry as a young tree, really see some groovy bark. Also black cherry when it's young starts to get much different as it ages. Choke cherry also being quite variable, but very interesting at a young stage. Common hop tree, so much beauty in these barks. Black willow, even these get really, really big. Willows, salix species are such high value for Lepidoptera, butterfly and moth caterpillars, and early blooms for pollinators and so on. And then I'm getting there, guys. Interesting seed heads, pods, nuts on trees and shrubs. That musclewood is showing another beautiful seed pod. Even buttonbush is kind of cool in the off season. A wetland plant, properly placed in moist areas. Redbud with its legumes, its legume pods, showing you exactly what it is in the legume family. That American hazelnut, edible, you can eat those, as you can eat the beaked hazelnut, a related species. This is a little bit shorter, Carlos cornuta. American beech, also edible nuts, very important mast for wildlife as well. Black walnuts, very, very tasty. This is one of my favorites. Man, they're hard to get into, though. I don't know how wildlife does it because I can barely do it myself. The sweet gumballs, yeah, just don't plant them next to a sidewalk. You'll be fine. Let the wildlife have those seed balls. Here's Eastern hophorn beam, again, with these really groovy pods. American sycamore with its fascinating fruiting bodies. Common hop tree, that really, really great butterfly plant, by the way, and beautiful seed pods. So much to love about these. American elm even has some really interesting seed pods. And then we'll just, I'm going a little over, bear with me here. I'll have plenty of room for questions. Interesting seed heads, seed pods, and fruits on perennials. Well, it's hard to catch these when they look good, perennials. So go out in your garden, take some pictures. I happen to catch some of these, like anise hyssop, looks quite fabulous with a coating of snow. Milkweeds, when they burst open and they're fluffy like this, they're so gorgeous. I love seeing this. Even Joe Pye weeds, I leave Joe Pye weeds standing through winter, like all of my perennials, and they ice up and they're magnificent. Hibiscus moschutos, swamp mallow, gorgeous, large pink or white flowers, like some moist area and full sun, but then you get these interesting seed pods. These are big plants. And even the subtle fruits of false Solomon seal in the off season, Solomon seal as well, things that we don't always focus on and notice. And then looking at things like mountain mints. This is Pycnanthemum tenuifolium, another favorite of mine, narrow-leaf mountain mint, looking to me just as beautiful, after it finishes flowering as it did when it was flowering. Here's Pycnanthemum virginianum, Virginia mountain mint, another really showy one. Just a few examples. And Black-eyed Susan, there's not a leaf on it, but it still looks cool, especially with that coating of snow. And, still maybe a few little seeds left for birds. Here's Maryland senna, Senna marylandica, with these big, thick legume-like pods. Solidago species getting a bit of a frosty top. And asters, so much beauty if we just leave them standing through winter. And last but not least, our evergreen structure, always important to remember to provide some structure that's evergreen for wildlife if you can, if it's appropriate for your ecosystem. The American holly, fully evergreen, magnificent, typically found in nature in woodlands, very shade tolerant. This one, not so much. This is full sun, the eastern red cedar. Great winter habitat for wildlife, particularly birds, along with the fruit. And white pine, I love white pine. I know they tend to have some breakage, but it's okay. They're so magnificent. And you probably notice that when you see white pine, you usually just don't see one of them. You see a grove of them together. I love to plant them that way. That's how they're best used. Canada and Carolina hemlocks, beleaguered by the woolly adelgid insect. So if you are going to plant them, and I think we all should keep these two species going, because they are so shade tolerant, or most shade tolerant conifers, very important in woodland ecosystems, but we have to actually treat them with horticultural oil in most cases, unless our winters get so cold that the woolly adelgid doesn't survive the winter, but that's getting rarer and rarer. And then evergreen structure for shrubs and subshrubs. There's that Gaultheria procumbens again, that wintergreen, very short, very effective as an evergreen ground cover, especially with a great fruit. Ilex glabra, another type of holly. This is a fully evergreen holly, inkberry, also dioecious. Good luck to you trying to find the males for sale. It's a crime. Really encourage your native nurseries to sell both males and females of species that are dioecious. You'll get the pollen for bees on the males. Both male and females flower, by the way, but you get the pollen for the bees on the males and the fruit for birds on the females. our lovely mountain laurel, just madly in love with mountain laurels. These ericaceous plants that like acidic soil, please make sure you do your soil test, you plant them appropriately. This guy's going to like kind of a part sun, part shade condition typically to do really well with that acidic soil. We have a couple of Kothway species. This is coastal dog hobble, fully evergreen, got some good deer resistance to it. Thank goodness, very effective in a shade landscape with enough moisture. And this one I had to throw in because it's native in Virginia, up in the mountains. This is Paxistima canbii, cliff green. It's a short evergreen subshrub, about a foot and a half tall. One of its common names is rat stripper, which I absolutely love. Again, for those of you in the mountain region, you might be able to grow this. I can't. This is the real deal, the Pyrrhus floribunda, the mountain Andromeda, not the Japanese Pyrrhus that we see for sale. Difficult to grow, it likes what it likes. Rhododendron catabiens, Catawba rhododendron. It's either a subspecies or variety that I see in the heath balds in full sun on, mountaintops. It's pretty cool, but mostly you're going to see these kind of a part sun, part shade condition. And then our most shade tolerant rhododendron, which I adore, is Rhododendron maximum, Rose Bay rhododendron. Absolutely such a pleasure when I go down to the southeast and I see tons and tons of these. It makes me so happy. These are wonderful plants. Ericaceous, they need that acidic soil. So final thoughts for you: find the beauty in ecological function. It's not just how a plant looks, but how it supports your local ecosystem. So I know we all think about aesthetics, but kind of move beyond it and think about all the wonderful things plants do. So thank you so much for having me this evening. And I hope you'll check out my book. Really important that we start thinking about our pollinators, and I'll be happy to start answering questions. So thank you so much for hanging in there with me. I know I went a little over.
Thanks so much, Kim. So if you have a question for Kim, please go ahead and add it to the Q&A panel at the bottom. You'll find the button down there at the bottom. And let's go ahead and open up the Q&A period for Kim. And moderating that this evening is Margaret. So Margaret, if you want to go ahead and get started.
Yes, thank you. All right, Kim, that was just really amazing. I suspect that your recording could be the most watched because trying to get all those details, you really gave us a lot of.
I tend to get the 1 pound bologna and or the 5 pound bologna in the 1 pound bag.
Yeah, very, very, very informative. Thank you.
Thanks.
All you need to know. So we got a lot of very nice questions. We have them grouped slightly by topic.
Okay.
It sounds slightly random to start out with this one. She or he said, when the speaker talks about moist, how moist is that? A boggy area?
That's a great question. That's a great question.
Yeah. So here, could a plant that needs moisture just get extra watering and manage?
I'm trying to avoid using, all of our horticultural terms, right? But, but that's really the best way to go about it, is to think about how we think about it in horticulture. Xeric being very dry, mesic being kind of medium, moistish, sometimes a little moister than other times, so never really too dry or too wet. And then hydric being super wet. So, as they say, it depends. But when I say somewhat moist, I mean not super dry, on the dry side. Some plants are variable, as you've probably figured out in your own landscapes when you've been planting, and you'll think, oh, let me try this over here and see how it does, and it doesn't do well. Or you plant something like that dicentric zinnia, that wild bleeding heart, and I had that stuff receding in little cracks in my Belgian block driveway curbing. I mean, no, it's a woodland plant, it shouldn't be in there. So you will find over time, as you plant more and more with natives, which ones are really flexible about where you can plant them and which ones are not.
Yes, thank you. Right.
Yep.
Last time, Jim McGlone told us that that if a tree grows in the swamp, it will do great in your lawn where it's bone dry and compacted. But I don't think you can make that a rule of thumb for perennials at all.
No, and I think we ought to really be focused on where plants grow in nature. So when you read plant descriptions, really, one of my favorite resources to use is the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center database, because they tell you where the plants grow in nature. And that's where I think we should best use them. So, to use like Lindera benzoin spice bush in full sun seems insane to me because it's such an effective shade plant. So really right plant, right place. Yeah.
All right, great. So, and speaking of that, when you said it'll grow in a closet, did you mean it grow in full shade? Really?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Without a speck of sun.
Okay.
It's great for that condition. Yep.
All right, so changing the subject, a couple people want a little clarification about flopping, just really what you even mean by flopping.
Okay. Well, I mean, not standing up. So there are a couple things that can impact flopping of plants, right? Depending on the species. Sometimes it's insufficient sunlight, right? And oftentimes like a plant will be leaning or trying to get to the sunlight. Sometimes it's fertile soil. The soil is just way too fertile and a plant will flop because of that. Overwatering is also, I had a client this week say, I don't know why my Lobelia cardinalis, my cardinal flower keeps flopping. And I looked and there's an irrigation head like right next to it. Well, it's going to flop. So overhead irrigation, I'm not a big fan of. I really am a big advocate for soaker hoses or the wonderful handheld hose where you can actually water, and it needs to be watered at the root, not getting all the leaves wet and promoting fungal disease. So.
Okay. Well, soaker hoses, I noticed, seem to get buried into the ground after 2 years. Do you take them up after a year? How do you handle that?
They can work okay as long as they don't get clogged up. So you just have to kind of check them. And, if you're, practicing the constant mulch application, just stop. Landscapers love this. Like every fall, every spring, they want to bring in more mulch. Mulch is a temporary placeholder. It is not an aesthetic principle. It is not a feature of a landscape. It's a temporary placeholder. We should all be working hard to vegetate, the soil where we can, with an exception. And that bee's reminding me of it. So the vast majority of our bee species are ground nesters. And so we do want to keep some bare soil unmulched, preferably in full sun for ground nesting bees. But yeah, don't keep building up the layers of mulch. You'll just get this knitted together anaerobic condition, which is really unhealthy for plants.
Okay. Someone asked, when is the best time to transplant plants that have taken over too much ground?
Depends on when they flower, right? So, that's a consideration, but it can be, if you really are at wit's end and you've got to move a plant, try to do it, in the fall or in the spring. Again, a little bit depending on the species, but what you don't want to do is be transplanting in the heat of the summer when it's really tough for plants to, to grow out a root system. Actually, plants in really, really hot, tough summers. And we've had a couple of them, at least where I am in the last couple of years, where we get a June that is oppressively hot and there's no rain. And flowers often will start shutting down their nectaries. They'll often stop growing to some degree because of the heat. So that is not a good time to transplant, but it's worth doing a little homework in terms of the species to see when the best time is to transplant that particular species. And also look at the condition of the material. If you're looking to transplant in fall and the material just looks awful, maybe you wait.
Very good. Okay. Now, early on, someone asked about flat top aster and whether it was hot. So I kind of wonder if you want to say anything about containers.
Yeah, so I actually do a talk, Great Native Plants in Containers, and there are lots of things that will grow really well in containers, lots. So a couple caveats: get a bigger container than you think you need, because you want to give plants room, right? Make sure you have a frost-proof container. Don't leave clay pots outside over winter if you've got any chance of a freeze. You're going to have to lighten up the soil because, garden soil it's just too heavy. You'll just have no drainage in a container. But I have trialed all sorts of plants in containers. I have not trialed flat top aster. I think it's worth a go. I mean, I have Joe Pieweed, Little Joe, which ain't that little, in containers, it's 4 feet tall. In my garden, it gets 5 to 6 feet tall, and they do fine. But I'll probably never get them out of the container because the root system is so intense. So things that tend to spread a lot or have a really deep or spreading root system, maybe not the best for containers. Case in point, I had a client this week. They had Pycnanthum muticum, the mountain mint, one of the mountain mints that we saw. They had it in a pot, and it looked miserable. And I just thought, this is not a place for this plant. This plant needs to be out, in the open and spreading. So think about that. Typically, say Monarda didyma, or Monarda fistulosa, scarlet bee balm, or wild bergamot. These are not great choices for containers. But Monarda punctata, the spotted bee balm, also known as horseman. I love all these weird names. That does really well in a container. They are not always perennial. Sometimes they function kind of as biennials or annuals, but as long as you've got great drainage and not too much moisture, they do great in pots. So it depends on the species.
Okay. All right. And then someone was asking about cutting back bone set to make it a little shorter. Do you want to talk about cutting things back in the late spring?
Yeah, I'll just be honest with you guys. I'm a lazy gardener, right? So by the time I've thought about it, it's just way too late anyway. Yeah, I mean, with these plants, I would do that kind of that Chelsea chop in maybe mid-June. And again, depending where you are, might do it a little earlier if you're in a warmer part of Virginia. I'm here in New York. Yeah, you can give it a try. I don't know. I struggle with this. I really want to enjoy the plants for who they are. And if my bone set wants to be 6 feet tall, well, go for it. But this can be tough because if you don't have the space, this is an alternative to using maybe a dwarf cultivar that isn't a very good cultivar. So like I said, I'll give you a couple examples. So I don't particularly like the dwarf aster cultivars. And I don't particularly like the Monarda dwarf cultivars. They tend not to be very attractive to pollinators. They tend to be rather weak plants. So, you have to kind of pick and choose your battles. Sometimes there are plants you just can't plant in your own landscape.
Yes, I had been hoping that cutting things back might keep them from flopping, but I'm not sure that actually works.
No, and soil fertility is a big one with that. If you've got plants that don't like a lot of fertility, and they're in fertile soil, they're going to flop. And I will admit to staking plants when I need to stake them. It's best to do that early in the game rather when it's a little too late. So anticipate.
Okay. All right. Then we had a couple related questions about straight species, cultivars, etc. So somebody wanted just like the definition of straight species, and then a related question there is, you've mentioned that several plants need genetically different plants to produce most fruit and berry production. Can you explain what that means and how I ensure I purchase genetically different plants?
Okay, so let's start with that. So yeah, it is complicated, and I can help you out a little bit on my website. I do address this about common dioecious plants, and then plants that need pollinator partners. And I'll be writing more about this. So, certain plants are dioecious, so you've got males and females, but it's not a hard and fast thing. Occasionally there are some peculiarities that pop up, like polygamodioecious and all sorts of oddball things. But, if you're going to be planting hollies, just count on them being males and females. And so that seems to be a little bit easier than some other species. However, winterberry, Ilex verticillata, they're named cultivars. They're named cultivars, and it's a male, it's a female, and then you have to look a little further and figure out whether they flower at the same time. And organizations like Rutgers and some other institutions have done a good job at putting out charts on things like blueberry cultivars and winterberry cultivars. I think this, an organization, the Chesapeake, has a good one on winterberries, as I recall. But if you're going for straight species plants, which I do encourage you for best genetic diversity, and I'll get into that in a sec, then you're going to have to really go to a native nursery and ask them if they've sexed their plants, males and females, or if they would with a hand lens when they're in bloom, or you yourself buy hand lens and you get on a YouTube channel and you figure out what the male flowers look like versus the female flowers. And I think nurseries need to do a better job of this. And I just get very frustrated when females are sold without a male in sight with things like Ilex glabra, inkberry, because we are planting not only for ourselves, but we're planting for wildlife. We do want the pollen on the male flowers, and we do want the fruit on the female plants. So that's monoecious and dioecious plants. Monoecious, you don't have to sweat it as much, but there are some monoecious plants that are not reliably self-fruitful. And native viburnums come into that category. And that's frustrating. So how do you know if you're buying a genetically different plant? Well, I've got actually a posting on that on my website you can check out. But I like to buy material from different nurseries and make sure it's in different containers. I much prefer buying plants that are grown from seed, but it's very tough to find a native nursery that's growing woody material from seed. Those that do, believe me, you should be paying a premium because it's such a long and slow process. It is worth just, way more than you're used to spending for somebody to actually grow a woody plant out from seed for you. So then you've got genetically different plants. But short of that, you may go to a nursery, they have absolutely no clue how the plants are grown. Well, the dirty little secret is that cuttings are a lot cheaper to produce, new plants via cuttings, asexual propagation. What happens when you buy, plants that are grown from cuttings? They're clonal. They're clones. They're genetically the same. So that means if you go to a nursery and you don't know how those particular viburnums have been grown, if they have not been grown from seed, and you buy two grown from cuttings, you have clones. That does you no good whatsoever. So you go to another nursery and try to find a genetically different one. Or you can use a straight species plant along with a cultivar, as long as they are synced in terms of bloom time. Like I said, it's a little bit more complicated with native viburnums. So it's a great source of frustration, but they're not the only plants. Nobody tells you that, hey, you want to grow elderberries? Well, they produce a lot more fruit if you've got two genetically different elderberries planted in close proximity. There are many plants like that. The corylus, the hazelnuts, same thing, but there are many plants like that. So make room. Now, let me talk a little bit about cultivars. There's a lot of research on cultivars that's been done. I've interviewed some of the people that have done it, and there's actually an excellent posting I found on Piedmont Master Gardeners that talks about this. And they cited me. Thank you, Piedmont Master Gardeners, because I'd interviewed Dr. Doug Tallamy about this. I'd interviewed Dr. Annie White about this, and so on. And so cultivars, as far as attractiveness to pollinators, sometimes it depends, right? Sometimes cultivars are very attractive to pollinators. Sometimes they're not. Depends on what's been done to the plant. Ditto for insect herbivory, Dr. Doug Tallamy's work, But what troubles me beyond potentially losing some of that ecological function is losing some of that genetic diversity. And because it's so much cheaper to produce cuttings than growing things from seed, we get into trouble. So I'll just give you an example of a plant. I probably shouldn't say this in front of all these people, but I'll tell you anyway. So the Mount Cuba Center does excellent plant trials. They have started in the last few years to include attractiveness to pollinators. And they've done and you can download those plant trials. They do these wonderful reports with pictures and descriptions, and download them. So they found that the most attractive Phlox paniculata cultivar to butterflies, and Phlox paniculata being tall garden phlox is one of the common names. So the most attractive cultivar was Phlox paniculata Gina. Jeana. It attracted like 4 times the number of butterflies as the next cultivar down. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is that even though that particular cultivar apparently does come true from seed, according to a horticulturist who I know who grows plants, that's not how it's grown for commercial use. It's grown as a cutting. So that means every single Phlox paniculata gena is genetically the same. So much for genetic diversity. Now, in the face of climate change, we are having increased pressure from pests and diseases, right? And so if we are planting, we're all planting the same plant that's genetically the same, and an insect or some pest or some disease hits that plant's toast. So having genetically different plants really helps us in the face of climate change. And I argue that biodiversity and genetic diversity is probably our most important tool in the face of climate change. So there are some native cultivars that are grown from seed. Those are ones that I give preference to. Sometimes plants are so dumbed down as cultivars that they become almost useless. I have a rant on my website about dwarf and native shrubs. Or native cultivars, do they measure up? And I'll cite an example. So there is and you guys, this is not native to you, but we have Cornus sericea, red osier dogwood, right? And, they get pretty big, 9 feet by 9 feet. It's easy peasy, similar to Cornus momum. And not everybody has room for that. So there is a dwarf cultivar called Kelsey. Kelsey's dwarf. And I was just consulting on a project for the landscape contractor working for the New York DEP on an installation, and they bought 1,100 Cornus sericea Kelsey. And I thought, why in the world first of all, why did they do that? Because that plant is known to produce very few flowers, which means very little fruit. So the reason that you would use that plant have just started to evaporate. And I can cite many cases where our dwarf native cultivars lose a lot of ecological juice. Not all of them, but quite a few. So we need to be thoughtful about the plants that we buy and do the research and not make assumptions that just because we're in the same genus or species, all cultivars are going to function in the same way. So if we from the get-go start with regional native plants that are appropriate for where we are and our landscape conditions and try to stick with as many straight species as possible, we are so far ahead of the game. So that's my message. Sorry for the long-winded answer.
And from what you're saying, it's a little hard to say that something's a straight species when it's been grown from a cutting.
Yeah,
it may be
right, but we do.
Being sold as a straight species,
right? So straight species really being how it's growing in nature. So there's a movement here in the Northeast, and I hope it's happening in Virginia as well, on really selling local ecotypes. Hiring botanists to go out and wild collect seed, growing that seed out, often with perennials in plug form, and selling local ecotype plants at native plant sales. And so this is really great, great news. But we've got a ways to go.
Okay, thank you. All right, turning to more specific questions about various plants. Someone said, the pawpaws I planted have dozens of suckers.
Mm-hmm.
I know this is the clonal habit of the plant.
Right.
Should I prune them off to direct more energy to the mother tree or let them be?
No.
The mother trees are about 7 years old and just started to bloom this year, which is sooner than mine have.
Wow. Yeah, they can be a little slow. So no, I would not mess with it. I mean, this is how the plant grows. This is the suckering habit. Now, if you were in commercial pawpaw production, you'd probably have a different approach, right? But at least I assume the person asking that question is not growing these plants commercially. So let the plant do what the plant wants. It wants to create a grove. I remember having a student years ago say that they had planted pawpaw in their orchard, just like other orchard fruits, and were like horrified that it was spreading all over the place. I'm like, this is what the plant does. So you really can't put a plant in the right place unless you know how it grows.
And also on the subject of pawpaws, someone said, I have a large area of pawpaws and I'm concerned about introducing buttonbush. Will they compete?
Well, buttonbush I would kind of reserve for right on the edge of a water feature, if that's what you've got. I mean, I don't know how close you're thinking about planting, but just in general with trees, let's stop planting on top of tree roots. If we can just manage that. I know it's hard in small landscapes. Trust me, I have a small landscape. But, planting underneath trees, especially with large containers of material, just such a bad practice. Say you've got, here's an example of one that's successful. So say you've got a fairly moist area around trees, and you just can't stand to look at that bare ground. Well, Fragaria vesca, the subspecies vesco, right? The woodland strawberry, it creates runners. It really doesn't have a lot of competition with the root system of a tree. But I think this practice of constantly planting under trees is just a really bad idea. They're competing for resources. So get your buttonbush further away, closer to the water's edge, and I think you'll be fine. Your pawpaw shouldn't be at water's edge.
Well, then people are going to be confused because they're trying to convert lawn and they all figure that the way they're going to convert lawn is to plant under trees.
Well, if I wish we all had a lot of trees left in our landscapes, but I'm here in the Northeast. It's not a pretty picture. But I always think of trees as being the most valuable resource in any landscape, as long as they're not invasive. So you can definitely remove a lot of lawn and plant. However, know that a mature tree may have a root system that extends 2.5 to 3 times the width of its canopy. So there are a lot of feeder roots around.
Yeah. Well, that's a dilemma. Okay. All right. So now somebody has too many wing stems. They say,
Yeah.
It's beautiful for a couple of weeks, but nothing else competes well with this monster.
Yeah.
Any suggestion for a pretty tall flower that will stand up to wing stem and bloom any time of the year, including fall?
Let's see, something that's vigorous. It's, I'm always kind of reluctant to make specific plant recommendations unless I know more about the site. Because and if I know that sounds like I'm being difficult, but I really believe in that. So I offer the person who asked that question to email me and give me a little bit more information about your soil and your site conditions, and I'll get you an answer.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Okay.
Before we move on, let me just give a quick time check here. We're
Sure.
approaching the 8:15 mark, and I'm not sure how much longer Kim wants to go on.
I'm good until 8:30. If people have questions, go for it.
Okay, I'll check back in a few minutes.
Sure.
Okay. All right. Now, this is about acidifying the soil. Someone said, can't we acidify our soil with peat so we can grow acid-loving plants? And what about coffee, lime, or pine needles?
So you're not going to like this answer either, folks. I try to work with the soil that is there. The exception being when I'm working with urban clients, in Brooklyn or in New York with, soil that's like ridiculously disturbed and there's nothing left of it. But I really believe quite strongly in working with your native soil and focusing on increasing soil health. Okay. So what does that mean? That means some cultural practices like not stepping on wet soil. If you have work being done in your house, making sure that you are creating a very clear space, maybe with caution tape, to keep contractors away from your tree roots and so on and so on. I think about using, nature's gold leaves where appropriate as a way to deliver some organic matter, and using good organic compost where appropriate. Not every landscape benefits from compost. You're on a heath bald, you don't get a lot of compost. But that's my view. I don't try to change pH unless there's a really serious deficiency that probably has been induced by some sort of action by humans. And occasionally I do see that, but it's very, very rare, and sometimes soil tests aren't accurate. So really encourage folks to get your soil test done by an agricultural extension or a proper soil lab and not do the home testing stuff. Get it done properly, and you'll have better, more accurate results. But, when you get down to, I had a client who had a 3.9 pH. A lot of things just die at 3.9 pH. It's really tough. And we had the soil retested, and after doing some amendments, and got it closer to, low fives. But it's really rarely rare that I mess with soil pH or soil texture, unless it's just a really disastrous condition.
Okay. And all right. So there were a couple comments about peat moss and the problems.
Yeah,
with that.
not sustainable. Yeah.
All righty.
Yeah.
I mean, since you're talking about the soil tests, you can get the pH that way, but what else are you looking for in those soil tests?
Well, you're looking for soil texture. Do you have very clay soil that holds a lot of moisture, where plants, like that Ilex verticillata, winterberry just love, other plants hate. Some plants that don't want it wet and goopy. You're looking at the percent of organic matter, neither too high nor too low. I mean, in some cases it's kind of hard to have too much organic matter, but I've seen it. About 10% is about as much as you want. If you've got a 1 or 2% level of organic matter, you probably don't have a lot of soil biology going on. You want to see if you have any like extreme deficiencies or excesses of macro or micronutrients and figure out why. Sometimes it's because, in my case, clients have just been dumping all these synthetic fertilizers, year after year after year, and just, really screwing up the soil. Sometimes, being more gentle and less intrusive on your soil makes a lot more sense. But, think about not just the chemical characteristics of soil, but, the biology of the soil. Soil is alive. It said that there are more macro and microorganisms in a teaspoon of soil than there are human beings who live on the planet. So I really like to think about that and increasing the life in the soil. And part of that is keeping soil vegetated, not compacted, not inflicted with all sorts of excessive nutrients that it doesn't need, and so on. And then consider the fact that soil holds more carbon than anything else. So again, climate change, something we need to be thinking about.
Mm. Okay. All right. Totally different subject. Are there any native bulbs?
Not that I use, I'm just trying to think. I mean, there's some corms like Camassia, Acilioides comes as, I think you can buy those. I'm trying to remember if they're corms, but certainly that's one that comes to mind. Don't really encounter it too much. It's like I don't really encounter too many annuals. Like jewelweed, it's a great annual. It's just really, really hard to find seed of jewelweed, which is a shame because I do try to introduce that occasionally into landscapes. Great for hummingbirds. Deer like it too, though, unfortunately.
Well, we've been telling people that it's the spring ephemerals that'll give you that bulb.
Yeah, it's not like the bulb that we're thinking of when we're thinking about exotics, but let me give it a shout out to the spring ephemerals for you guys who have a woodland setting. They're really, really important. These are the plants that come up before the trees leaf out when, the weather's still, cool, but not too cool. And there's enough moisture and they get exactly what they need. Things like squirrel corn, Dutchman's breeches, trout lily, and so on and so on. And these are really important plants in many cases for early emerging pollinators. And many evolutionary connections. There are a lot of specialists that utilize these plants, specialist bees. So do think about using spring ephemerals. Now, unfortunately, a lot of them, Dicentras being an exception, a lot of them will be deer browsed. The Dicentras, Cucularia, Canadensis, they won't be browsed. But we don't use them enough, and they can be rather difficult to find. So get to the native nurseries, early in the season or your native plant sales and, try some of these out because they're just really important plants. And then when the trees leaf out a little bit later in the season, then these plants die back and then they come up, come up again in the spring. One that people love is Mertensia virginica, Virginia bluebells. I mean, who doesn't love that one? And that will not be deer browsed either. So it gives you an opportunity to have a bit of an early flower show while also providing pollinators with some early resources.
Yeah. And Spring Beauty seems to be okay.
Spring Beauty, Claytonia virginica, Claytonia caroliniana, those are great as well. And they do have an association with specialist mining bees, a particular species.
You mentioned using them if you have a woodland setting, but my thought is that they're just the thing to have right next to your sidewalk when you're walking to the car in March.
Well, depending on how much shade they need, some plants need more shade than others. Most of these are woodlanders. Not all, but most.
All righty. So someone else asked, I love my Virginia sweet spire, but the leaves have a lot of insect damage. The holes are long and curved. I was told this would not harm the bushes, but it is somewhat unattractive. The same insect seems to feed on Virginia creeper in the bed. Should I take any action?
So, I actually just saw an infestation of Itea virginica of red-headed flea beetles, which I had not seen before, and they overwinter in the soil. So I know a lot of, if it's that, and I haven't seen the damage. So, but if it is that, then keeping really good sanitary conditions, like removing dead leaves and eliminating weeds where they like to thrive would be a way to go. But I am really, again, like hands off when it comes to insect damage. I'm one of those people when I see insect chewing, except by like Japanese beetles, right? I get really excited. I'm really happy. Like I have a dwarf chinkapin oak, Quercus perennial, which is a really cool little shrubby oak. Its leaves are just chewed to bits. And I think that's great because I know what's happening. It's being its host plant that it is. So, unless a plant is defoliated, I don't worry about it too much. At this time of year, you should not be expecting perfect foliage. But some insects can be quite devastating, and I really admire a grower here in New York who is selling hibiscus asciutos, the swamp rose mallow, interplanted with allium, with onion. And the reason that because I said, what in the heck is this? He's a wholesaler, and he said, well, Japanese beetles really don't like allium species, and they really love swamp rose mallow. And it works. So thinking about some of this companion planting, and we need more research on this for sure, but I think this is an excellent way to be thinking about native landscaping. And you do have to tolerate some damage with native landscapes. It's just what it is. It's most of it's not damage at all. It's it's nature cycling. It's nature doing its thing. I've seen studies that say somewhere between 90 and 95% of all of the insects in an average home landscape are either beneficial or benign. It's just a small percentage that are bad actors. Yeah, they can be really bad. I understand, but.
Okay. Someone else said they'd heard that mountain laurel can be highly flammable. Is this true? And should I avoid planting this near a structure?
That doesn't ring a bell. It's possible. It's a woody plant, right? I'm kind of stuck. If you were in California asking me that question, I think I'd have a different answer. I mean, clearly we are experiencing more drought even on the East Coast and more periods of inundation, these extremes. But I can't say that that's something I would stress over. No.
I seem to remember Jim McGlone told us last time that it's the evergreens that are more of a fire issue than deciduous plants.
I think it depends, and what's your house made of? If you're living in a wood cabin, I mean, I'm in a stucco house, so I'm not really all that worried. And we get a lot of rain. But, one thing that we do have to think about a lot more with climate change are the icing events that we're getting. So, big snowfalls, easy peasy. Lots of our native plants can accommodate big snowfalls, and they flex their branches and they can accommodate, but they can't accommodate these freezing events that we're getting. You know, we're going to see much more damage on our woody plants as a result. Already are.
All right, we got two more questions then. All right, so the next to last one, I think may have just been someone a little confused about the species, but he or she was concerned about calicarpa and some of them being invasive. So, of course, there are invasive calicarpas.
Well, I mean, there's Calicarpa dichotoma, which is, you know, non-native. So the beauty berry, I think you're, you know, Calicarpa americana, I've never seen it have any invasive tendencies.
Okay. All right. So for the last question, and this is, you can talk all night on this, I suspect. So, when you're ready. Does she have any ideas for prompting localities and nurseries to promote native plants? Are there any national movements?
Yes. And first of all, what you're doing in Virginia is spectacular. You're a role model, Virginia. All of you people who have been working on this, my hat's off to you, because you are making a big difference. I will bet you it's a lot easier for me to find native plants in Virginia than it is in New York. But what can we do? What can we do as customers? Well, first of all, when you go to a conventional garden center, ask for natives. And if they don't have them, say, well, that's the only thing I plant with. So gosh, I'd love to give you business, but if you don't have what I'm looking for, got to find, you know, another source. So that's one thing you can do. You can also do something that I did. So I'm on the steering committee of the Native Plant Center in New York. We're the first national affiliate of the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center, and been around for about 20 years. And so about 12 or 13 years ago, I approached a local nursery and I said, you know, we have at the Native Plant Center our own sale on site on our campus. We're on a college campus. We have our own plant sale in April, but we don't do anything in the fall. So would you like to partner with us for September or early September sale? And we've done that. I can't remember, it was 12 or 13 years running on a weekend, 2 days. We bring in the volunteers, we bring in speakers like me who do walk and talks, and they bring in more native plants. And we double their sales for that weekend every year. So sometimes, you know, making more money inspires businesses to do things a little bit differently, but asking. And, you know, as far as national movements, well, not quite national, but y'all know pollinators in trouble, right? This is the reason I wrote this book. We have a big movement in the Northeast called the Pollinator Pathway Project. And I think it's come down as far as Pennsylvania and maybe Maryland. I don't think it's hit Virginia yet. And it's all run by volunteers. And you can look it up, Pollinator Pathway Project. And this is a resource for folks to figure out how they can take their municipality, their town, their whatever, and start getting people to plant pollinator gardens to create the connectivity that's so absent across our landscapes. And you get your property on their map, on the Pollinator Pathway map, and you can put out your little yard sign for Pollinator Pathway. This thing is on fire. People are embarrassed if their town's not on the Pollinator Pathway. So it's all good. And, you know, I think things like that can be very inspiring. I'm a big believer in signage. I think whether it's you know, I don't know what signage you might have in Virginia, but a Xerces pollinator habitat sign, or, you know, a Wildlife Federation habitat sign, or something, a no pesticide sign, something at the end of your driveway that kind of clues people in. You're gardening differently. You're gardening for a reason. You know, you are becoming a role model. I think this is a very powerful thing. So, yeah, you know, there are lots of ways to approach this. They're all good.
They're all good.
They're all good.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate it. I hope I'll meet at least some of you in person at some point in life. And really thank you so much to the hardworking folks involved with the Plant Virginia Natives Marketing Partnership. Just an inspirational effort, and I'm really happy to have been a small part of it. So thank you.
Thank you again, Kim. Wonderful information, and I'm sure some people are going to be following up with emails and with checking out your all the resources that you recommended and your great book. Virginia, do you want to put up the closing slide at this point?
Sure
And what
will.
I'll do is go ahead and again, just thank Kim for all the information. Officially close out the question and answer period at this time. And then invite people to please join us for the next webinar, which will be coming up on Tuesday evening, October the 26th at 6:15 p.m. And the speaker will be our own Beth Mizell, who was helping with the question and answer session this evening with Blue Ridge Prism. And she's going to speak with us about common invasive plants in Virginia, how to identify them, control them, and what potential native alternatives there are. So again, thank everybody for attending tonight. Join us for the next one on the 26th. Wishing everyone a good night. And thanks for all